Welcome, everyone. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. And it's great to welcome you all here to Atlantic Council headquarters in Washington, D.C. Minister Sitharaman, it is an honor to have you here at the Atlantic Council during the IMF World Bank meetings. Your counterpart, your American counterpart, Secretary Yellen, said in her speech at the Atlantic Council last week that this is a crucial moment for the global economy, and quote, "We ought not wait for a new normal. We should begin to shape a better future today," end quote. It is in that context, not waiting for a new normal, beginning to shape a better future today. It's in the context the Atlantic Council does its work, and it's in that context that we welcome you here today, Madam Minister, on behalf of the Atlantic Council and the GeoEconomics Center, and Josh Lipsky in the South Asia Center, and Irfan Noureddin. In addition to serving as India's first full-time finance minister, you previously served as your country's defense minister, as well as Minister for State for Finance and Corporate Affairs, among many prior leadership roles. We are honored to have you with us to share your expertise on critical issues concerning India's growth, recovery, and engagement with the global economy. Amid this week's IMF and World Bank spring meetings, I look forward to hearing your perspective on India's economic recovery and growth amid intersecting crises, both economic, geopolitical, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. Few economies are more important in our increasingly interconnected and interdependent global economy. India is among the fastest growing economies and represents the third largest economy on the planet. And despite pandemic-related setbacks and ongoing geopolitical tensions, your growth continues. The U.S.-India partnership remains central in our shared interest of a democratic and market-oriented South Asia and Indo-Pacific, especially given that soon the Biden administration will release its Indo-Pacific economic framework. So that's the backdrop for today's important conversation with you, Madam Minister. And we look forward to hearing your remarks, as well as a robust discussion moderated by our GeoEconomics Center and South Asia Center Senior Directors, Josh Lipsky and Irfan Noureddin. And with that, Your Excellency, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Fred. Minister.
So thank you very much, Atlantic Council, for inviting me, giving me this time to share my thoughts. Whilst I have a set of prepared observations on how the Indian economy went through the pandemic and how the government and the people of India together could come out of such a serious challenge that we had to face, that in spite of severe lockdown during the first quarter of 2020-2021, the recovery has been distinct, the recovery has been pronounced, and today, therefore, we are able to get back to what we were earlier, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So I'll go about the prepared part of my speech, but not so much read it, but highlight some of the features of what I wanted to convey through my written speech. I'll certainly share the speech for anyone who wants to use it for further reading. So as we look at India, given the pandemic and the recovery from it, and also where we stand today, we see the decade before us, ending 2030, as a very robust decade where India would definitely be one of the fastest continuingly growing economy. And why do I have that confidence? I have that confidence because whether during the pandemic or slightly earlier than that, we had taken every opportunity. During the pandemic, the challenge was converted into an opportunity. And earlier, before the pandemic, it was our duty, and therefore we did undertake reforms, both structural and also process. As a result of which, prior to the pandemic, introduction of the GST, which was never the case before in India, you had 28 different provinces, 28 different laws, 28 different check posts that products and goods had to travel, and each check post became a big difficulty for the transporters and also for the movement of goods. So whether GST was done before the pandemic, equally, measures for digitizing the Indian economy had also been undertaken prior to the pandemic. Again, prior to the pandemic, because digitization was happening, we brought in a financial inclusion program like never seen anywhere in the world. And I'm not boasting here. Matter of fact, because India's population being what it is, and even after decades of trying to reach out through banks going to the villages, setting up their brick and mortar offices, financial inclusion was a distant dream for many Indians. But from 2014, because we also were simultaneously moving with digitization, it was possible to give every individual an account in a bank without even having a brick and mortar branch in that village. So the Jan Dhan scheme, which was introduced in 2014 and undertaken in such a speed, brought in everybody into the banking sector's core activity. Now, that was the first of the three letters which marked the major revolutionary change in our economy. The three letters are J, A, and M. Jan Dhan is for the first one. A is the Aadhaar. Aadhaar is nothing but a biometric identification for an individual. It could be given as a card, but it had a number. And that biometric, by the very nature, was easy to get part of digitized regime in the banks. And it was also easy to have that biometric as one of the ways in which you could verify eligible recipients of entitlements given by the government. Why is this a big deal? Entitlements in India have always been given for the poor. But when it has been given without a question saying 10 people in this village, A, B, C names given, you transfer it from the central government to the state government, from the state government to the local bodies, and from the local bodies to the individual. There was no accounting for actually who the recipients were. Do they really deserve to get it? And above all, in the unfortunate case of that individual living no longer, would that be retrieved, meaning put an end to that? Or if there are newer people entering into it, do you have fresher names getting added? Names got added, but nothing got deleted over the decades, that is. So that is one very naive way of me telling you we wanted transparency, but there were also ghost accounts, recipients taking it without any actual individual living in that village with that name or residence. Long and short of what I want to tell you there was a lot of pilferage, and government's resources were going to people who didn't even exist. So when you wanted to bring in this biometric identity to individuals and made it digital and made it therefore inclusive in your financial inclusion programs, you cut down on all those bogus accounts, actually ensured that the money went or the resources went only to those who deserved it, and you were able to periodically monitor as to who they are and which bank account did receive that entitlement. So that's the second of the JAM. And the third one is mobile. Again, the digital revolution, which was brought in prior to the pandemic, enabled that you were able to communicate with the individual about the receipt of any entitlement from the government or anything else that is due to him could go as a message. Earlier, it was just a message from the local authority, but gradually when the internet spread into the villages, incidentally, I'll just give a factoid here for you. In the pandemic year 2020, we had nearly 299 million rural Indians getting internet connected. And that was only in 2020. Post that, we've had another 135 million joining the internet. And as a result, today, the messages are reaching without doubt. Now, we are also tweaking our India stack, which you know probably India stack being that which is created indigenously, technologies that is created in such a way that they become facilitators or enablers for further innovation, and further innovation being open API platforms which give us the Aadhaar, the identity, biometric identity, or which give us the Bharat payment portals or the unified payment interface, based on which today India leads the world in terms of the number of digital payments that happen in a month. The last month, March 22, I'm digressing a bit, pardon me for that. March 22, we had 123 billion transactions happening in the UPI. And earlier it was, 1 year ago, it was something in the range of 68 billion. Am I right? Pavan, do correct me. 67 billion. And 5 years prior to that, it was just something like 355 million only. The rapidity with which Indian payment portals are functioning, and that is an outcome of the India stack that we had created. Open, free, private individuals can also join in it. So innovations were facilitated by India in anticipation of wanting to make sure that Indians get connected. So on the one hand, you have internet even to rural areas moving. On the other, India stack gets more and more innovative portals getting added onto the platform. And on the other, government is pushing with the direct benefit transfers, and also government going through payment incentivization, saying you please join digital payment, so that that economy, which was till then not at all in any form of formalization, is now pushed to become formal, because they've used technologies for either payment, or they've gone into the banks because they've been given an account, or they are in the bank receiving the entitlements from the government. So this is prior to the pandemic. Did we imagine there will be a pandemic? Not at all. But for a country of this size, after 70 years, after 70 full years of independence, not financially include all its citizens, was completely unacceptable. So we moved on this ground. We thought technology was the only one which could give us solutions. And it did give us solutions. But it also had very many other benefits, such as when we were facing a situation of the pandemic, when movement got affected, we could, at the press of a button, sitting in Delhi, ensure every one of those who required to get the benefit get it by direct benefit transfer. And those who were in the rural areas were still marketing their goods through the platforms, saying, this is where I am, you do me the payments, through not any more plastic cards, not any more cash, but through their phones, because they kept QR codes in their shops. In their fields, and this is my personal experience, in one of the villages, we were driving And we saw from the field, the farmer coming and stacking all his vegetables on the bund, from where the trucks would come and take their things and go away, but trucks weren't moving, but some of us were moving just to see if facilities are reaching people. And looking at the fresh vegetables, one is always tempted, you wanted to go pick it, and they said, no problems, pay it, but no payment. This is there before you, QR. And in a very triumphant tone, the lady told me in a village, in a slang, she said, you don't know what it is? Go ahead doing it. Like that with a finger. So the adoption of fintech is phenomenal. And there are quite a few people, even in India, who earlier had commented saying, what will it do? You don't have internet in the villages. What will it do? Even if they get internet, would they know to use all this technology? Our rural Indians have surprised all of us. The adoption rate of fintech in India, I'm taking the example of data based on 2019, is somewhere close to 85, 86%. And 2019 figure for globally is somewhere 64%. So Indians can surprise everybody. Adoption of technology, I'm so pleased to see that it has gone down to the villages. They've happily taken it. They're now very savvy about using it. And of course, the India Stack has also done a bit more by saying, you don't need to have a feature phone. You can do it even with you don't need to have a smartphone. You can do it even with a feature phone. So technology is also moving to include many more people. Now, we also have a strange wallet system where you could use a feature phone even if you don't have a bank account, in spite of the Jan Dhan movement and everything else. You would still be able to pay somebody through your phone. So there are very many, and the fintech revolution is something, again, with the data I would like to present before you. 20 fintechs in the last 1 year have become unicorns. And 1 in every 4 startups is a fintech. So financial technology innovation today has reached such a level that it is rapidly changing the profile of India itself. So this is about what fintech, about what digitization, about what technology has made possible even during the pandemic. Now, however, all this might sound, and you might think that I'm here talking about only that side of the world where the revolution has reached. What about the others for whom the revolution didn't reach? We made sure that for 800 million Indians, food grains, some quantity of pulses, some quantity of cooking gas, which is the liquefied petroleum gas, the LPG as we call it, were distributed for free during 2020. The food grain program, free food grain, continues in 21. And it continues even now because we just want to be sure that till such a time people are really all right to come out of the situation, we will support them with the food grains. That's taken care of the poor. And other than this, of course, are the ways in which, and on this, Prime Minister Modi will have to be credited without a doubt. Governments plan, governments execute plans, but there's always one gap which is remaining, and you continue that, carry it forward for the next year, carry it forward for the next year, and so on. One USP of Prime Minister Modi, and that is very distinct to him, is that he'll sit through the planning, sit through also execution, follow it up, but ensure the last mile delivery of any program. And that is where distributing free gas, not just during the pandemic, even earlier, so that people get out of using fossil fuel or even wood or even coal. The commitment to climate consciousness began even through that. Distribution of LPG at affordable prices happens We subsidized them. Earlier, when the first time they were enrolled, they were freely enrolled into the system. The stove on which the gas gets connected was given free. And this reached without discrimination to nearly 8 crore, which is what, 80 million? 80 million individuals. All of them received it who did not have it earlier. So the commitment to climate change is not just at the top end about carbon emission, conversion of fossil fuel to renewable energy, and so on. It also transfers to the ground level where people, because they don't have access to LPG, are still using forest wood. They would go miles to collect the wood and come and use it in their kitchen. Even that has been attended to. So the saturation of every scheme, whether it's housing, whether it's toilets, whether it is cooking medium, whether it is electricity, all this has been achieved at the ground level. And that is one of the reasons why the recent IMF's report spoke about how that even during the pandemic and just before it onwards, the grain distribution, food grains distribution, has actually made a difference in eliminating extreme poverty in India. So the long and short of it is, even as you are attending to the poorest of the poor, ensuring not just giving them free food grain, but you're giving them those which can change their lifestyles. They don't have to spend hours collecting firewood or hours collecting drinking water. Today, pipes are reaching home with running water. For somebody sitting in Washington, even for me sitting in Delhi, these are givens. But there are villages in India who still need a tap connection to their house, which, in other words, ensures better health, just as better toilet facilitation being provided in the house improves health. So these were the saturation achieved, last mile connectivity achieved, and in the meanwhile, financial inclusion being brought in, and ensuring that access is provided for those who need it, has brought about a certain confidence in the economy. If this is the base on which we are talking about economic revival post the pandemic, the one big step that the government decided was we shall not tax people to get out of the pandemic. Our revenue to rescue the economy was not going to come out of taxing people. No COVID tax was levied on anybody. In 2020-21 financial year or 21-22, we have not increased tax on any item. On the contrary, in 2019, we brought down the corporate tax to the lowest level, which you would see anywhere in the globe, 15%. So when the pandemic came, we realized the best multiplier that we will have for recovery of the economy would be for government to spend money in building infrastructure. So capital expenditure was our route to recovery. Capital expenditure was the course which we took after quite a lot of consideration, because even as the pandemic was raging, the advice given to us was, no, you please put money in the hands of the people. Our feeling was that money in the hands of the people will certainly create some demand for consumption immediately. But the calculation by Reserve Bank of India was that for every 1 rupee spent on that score, the multiplier was only 95 paisa, meaning 0.95 to 100. So if Indian rupee is 100 paisa, the multiplier that I get from spending on directly putting money in the hands, or what we call as revenue expenditure, would only give me a 95 paisa multiplier immediately. and nothing much at all for the medium and the long term. Whereas the study also very clearly established that if I were to spend that 1 rupee on a capital project, a project where you create an asset which will be used for many other things, whilst using it for construction of that asset, it gives jobs. It also has demand for basic core products like cement or steel or anything. And those who manufacture that also get their jobs intact. Production happens there. Asset gets created here. Jobs in both the places. The multiplier in the short term would be something like 2.34 paisa, 2 rupees 34 paisa. And in the long term, it probably will go a bit more and reach up to 3 rupees 40 paisa. So we thought for every rupee that you're going to spend during the pandemic for getting the economy out of the situation would be better served if you choose the route of spend it on capital infrastructure, capital expenditure, because it has greater multiplier effect for immediate term and also for the long term. And therefore, in 2020-21 budget, we had raised the budget for the capital expenditure to about 3.54. Correct me, Ananta Nageshwaran? 7.5 lakh crores. The previous year. From 3.5 we went to 5.34, and this year that 5.34 has gone to 7.5. So consistently in the year of the pandemic and the year following, we have increased the capital expenditure, and this year's increase is about 34%. Last year's budgetary expenditure on the capital expenditure, which is the 5.34, was almost achieved. 5.1 lakh crores trillion was achieved. We spent it, we followed it up, made sure the money was spent. This year we have given 7.5 lakh crores. So the emphasis on capital expenditure being the one which has higher multiplier, being the only way to come out of the pandemic, last year showed the result, and this year hopefully will show the but we recovered sooner from it, and the economy picked up. This year, the Omicron was milder a version, and therefore it didn't cause so much of an agitation in the economic recovery angle. So we were able to get out of it. Now, do I have a time limit? No. So this is the broad picture about coming out of the pandemic. However, I would like to add a word about how the Indian banking network, banking system, which should actually be supporting all this, had gone through quite a difficult phase. NPAs had risen, banks' own provisioning was a big taxing thing on them. We had to keep infusing money into the bank just so their activities will not suffer. We had pursued a lot of these NPAs to get the monies back. So today I'm happy to tell you, Indian banking system is at its good health. We have amalgamated several banks because for a growing India, we wanted bigger banks. And several of those banks have now been amalgamated, and we see a lot of the scaling up advantage that we have derived from it. Digitization has also helped in one more thing. The Reserve Bank has also been very nimble about it in setting up digital NBFCs, digital only NBFCs, which have accentuated the lending processes. Now we are in the process of setting a digital bank as well. Not one, 75 of them this year. Only digital bank. So India is moving actually on several fronts. We've opened up for FDI in so many different areas. In fact, the Jan Dhan or financial inclusion scheme has enabled us to take insurance products to the smallest of villages. We have provided with great incentive life insurance cover, accident insurance cover. We also want now term insurances to reach them. So insurance is penetrating a great deal in the villages as well as in the urban areas. As it is, we have announced, and this would be my final point, just to labor for you, how we are also looking at the next 25 years before we reach India at 100 years of independence, for which a lot of futuristic schemes have been identified. We've announced production linked incentive schemes for 13 different sunrise sectors, some of which is solar energy panel production. Hydrogen mission has been announced. There is a PLI also for semiconductors. In fact, in my visit today, this time, I'll be meeting up with a lot of semiconductor manufacturers to draw out a lot of investments of these sunrise sectors, which include the solar panel, as I said, medical devices. We have incentivized investments coming to India, which would want to relocate from otherwise not so friendly destinations, so that India can be the next manufacturing hub as an alternate to many of those which have gone into a supply disruptive cycle. And when countries go through their disruptive cycles, for whatever extraneous or internal reasons, it affects the global value chain itself. We want to be that one country where disruptions do not happen because we are more driven by rule of law. We have shared values with the United States. We also believe strongly in democracy. In fact, it's a robust, sometimes noisy democracy, but democracy nevertheless. And inherently, Indians have had the trait of being very democratic. It is only probably during, let us say, some rule during the British times, we wouldn't have been so actively engaging at three levels of democracy. Democracy is very entrenched in India. So I think shifting some of these manufacturing into India and keeping India as a manufacturing center for exports from out of India are all going to encourage continuous, not so disrupted supply chains. And these are the areas in which we're moving. In a way, these are the reasons I would think that India was able to face the challenge of the pandemic and come out. There are global challenges even today, whether it's the crude price, whether it is the prices of all the commodities which have gone skyrocketing. These will have an impact on all economies. But even with this said, India's inflation today is at about 6.9 last month. Our tolerance band is only 4% plus or minus 2% to it. So we could go up to 6. We've breached the 6, but we've not really breached it so badly. Of course, the price burden is on the common man. We are trying to relieve him of that stress. But notwithstanding the challenges, we are now able to stand up and move forward with a lot more system and process reforms. I didn't list out all the reforms that we've undertaken, but today I can say India is one of those good destinations to do business. And I welcome all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that really fascinating overview of the Indian economy. And I know we have many questions from our group, and I have the honor of starting. So I'll start where you finished on the crude prices. And I think going back, if we look back about 6 months, the Indian government has made major commitments on energy. We think back to the COP26 summit and the commitment to be carbon neutral by 2070. And so I'm wondering, given the recent geopolitical shocks going on, has any of that changed the Indian government's thinking or focused how investments in new energy are being approached, green finance, something I know that's important to the government? So I think it'd be useful to hear your perspective on that.
This is a big challenge area, there's no doubt about it. We had, since after the Paris COP summit, made a lot of commitments, and probably we are one of the 6 countries who had fulfilled most of the commitments made in Paris. 400 megawatt of solar newly added to the bundle, and now being added more and more. We're also getting into wind energy in a big way. But yes, one calculation which I think we had in our mind was the transition would be filled with natural gas. The transition will be enabled by natural gas. The transition would be also sort of clean because it's natural gas. But unfortunately, what has happened because of the recent developments is not only that the crude, a fossil fuel from which we want to move out, has also shot up. Natural gas, which is a transition fuel we wanted, even that's gone up, and it's also in short supply. And I've just explained to you all as to how we've taken natural gas even for cooking purposes into the villages, into every family, poor or rich, it didn't matter, and we're subsidizing even that. So when the price of such a fuel, which is a transition fuel, goes skyrocketing, your calculations get upset. And also the question that the base factor in your energy, in the electricity that you produce, whether it is from hydropower, nuclear power, or from the renewable sources, and also from thermal, still is largely dependent on thermal energy. So your dependence on coal ideally will be coming down. And if we pegged the coming down to a certain period, now because of the transition gas becoming much more in price and availability becoming a bit difficult, the dependence on coal and the speed with which we wanted to get out of it will now be challenged. The speed with which we want to come out of dependence on coal will be challenged. So that's what is the big problem before us. Our commitments will be fulfilled as regards renewable energy. Our commitments to refashion our energy basket remains intact, but I suppose the time that it's going to take will probably have to be relooked. However, the commitments made by our Prime Minister in COP26 in Scotland is something which we have taken seriously, and we are moving forward to fulfilling it.
Thank you for that. So you started your remarks focusing on fintech, and that's a major issue. Feedback. It's a major issue we've focused on here at the council, including on central bank digital currency. And I know that you have announced, and the government has announced, there will be a digital rupee by 2022, 2023 timeline. And I believe from our research here at the council, that's a faster timeline than the European Central Bank, certainly than the Federal Reserve, which has not even announced the central bank digital currency project. So it'd be interesting for us to hear from you the thinking behind introducing a central bank digital currency, given your remarks on financial inclusion, and then how you see the interplay of a central bank digital currency with private cryptocurrencies, including some of the new taxes on them.
Well, what I've taxed is not a currency. Yes, we've announced it in this budget that the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, will come up with the central bank driven currency, digital currency. It's only a natural course of progression when India announced the digital currency through the central bank. Because you've heard me talk about how much of digitization has happened in India. how much of payment is happening, how much of fintech is happening, how much of fintech's becoming unicorn. And we are not against the distributed ledger technology. We are not against that blockchain technology, which can come up with very many other functions and help the society. And I know many countries are using this for financial inclusion, whereas we've taken our course for financial inclusion and probably we are saturating as much as we can. So the technology is not what we are averse to or we are against. Not at all. We would want to benefit from, and India is contributing a lot in that sphere. So, as a natural course, it was expected because cross border payments, more efficient management of money, better and cost effective ways of dealing, and timely transactions being undertaken are all facilitated when a central bank brings the currency out, the digital currency. And when the central bank comes up with it, it has an intrinsic value. And that which has the intrinsic value is the currency. But outside of it, whatever happens is, as I said, part of the distributed ledger technology, and it has its own use. We would like to benefit from it and we'd like to contribute to it. Our youth are savvy, they can handle it. And why that happens even today is because there are people creating some kind of a, let's say, code which can be coinized. And that is done because you tend to think that there can be future market for it. And the transactions are happening unabated, there's no doubt. Transactions are happening, something is being earned out of it, and a sovereign definitely goes there because if you can earn, the sovereign should also get a bit of it. So we've taxed. But the issues there are that they remain unregulated outside now. And for arriving at a protocol for regulation, it is going to take a bit of time. We have already set the process of consultation on board, it's happening. Many countries have already started looking at coming up with protocols. We need a technological solution to deal with it. I don't think there is one yet. And it has its own repercussions on questions being raised about the veracity of such transactions. Who's, after all, going to certify it? Is it a verifiable transaction? Where does the money go? Who is the one who gives that money? Hopefully, it's not going to fund terrorists, nor is it being used to launder money. So we need protocols in place. But the central bank coming up with a digital currency is the currency. And it is only natural for India, which has done so much in fintech, to expect the next stage in having a digital currency, which is through the central bank.
Thank you.
I think it doesn't face that.
I think so. You can hear me. Technology and I. Thank you. Okay, I have the pleasure of asking the last question for this, for the formal recorded part of it. And your comments on digitization are music to our ears and to many of my colleagues around the room who've spent the last 6 months focused on US-India digital cooperation. And for that long flight home, we've given you reading material that we hope you'll ask your colleagues to read. There's lots of ideas touching on everything from data flows, manufacturing and supply chain resilience, use of technology for social good, and e-commerce. And then a report in which we call for a new US-India digital handshake, which we'd love to talk to you and your team about at length. A lot of the work you described was real reform on digitizing India's economy, which then raises a set of questions about the interface of that new digital economy with a global digital economy, which then raises questions about policies about cross-border data flows and other things that are quite complicated and which India has taken a particular position on. As you imagine the years to come, what do you see as the opportunities for digital cooperation that are cross-border? And given that you are in Washington, what are you hoping to get? What progress would you like to see in terms of the US-India bilateral conversation on digital economy issues? Ma'am.
US-India bilateral, I think, has had several years, good years, and it continues. I distinctly remember, and Ambassador Sandhu is one of those who's been instrumental in speeding up things uh, to better the and deepen the partnership, widen the partnership. It was only in 2018, and the memories are very strong and fresh in my mind, when we signed the COMCASA, the 2+2, where the defense minister and the foreign minister sit with their counterparts in the US and take things forward. These are unimaginable developments which have happened in the recent past. And before the COMCASA was the LEMOA, Logistics Agreement. India is outside of the NATO, the one ally with whom the US has maintained strategic relationship. Ambassador, correct me if I'm wrong. I've myself visited, and now I know my senior colleague, who's the current defense minister, has also visited the Indo-Pacific Center in Hawaii. In fact, it was named PACOM at that time. It was still before that Central Command or something of the kind. Oh, sorry, yes, I have Ambassador here. Wouldn't you say, Rich Verma, things have moved at that time? You also spearheaded it at your time. And we have, between Taranjeet Sandhu and Rich Verma, two very strong engines which led this development. They pulled it to this far. So I think the relationship between India and the United States is at one of its best. And we're able to engage and talk to each other on every issue without hesitation. And I'm glad to say here, the recent summit, where the two ministers were here, defense minister and the foreign minister, for the 2+2, whereas the Prime Minister of India spoke virtually, and President Biden had also spoken in that. Absolute cordiality and listening to one another. So I think this is one of those times when India and United States, two large democracies, have found their space and they are comfortable working with each other. And the cooperation on data. But one more thing which I need to add here. The recent United States put up document, the IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, is a fantastic thought which has come from the US. We've just looked at it. Prime Minister Modi said he'll have a due consideration given to it and we'll go into it. It has 4 pillars. It's a very innovative way of engaging with countries in that region. Many, Brunei, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, India, all of them are being brought on board for the IPEF. So there is a new traction to this relationship. That'll look at data, that'll look at environment, that'll look at trade, that'll look at supply chains, that'll look at environment, that'll also look at taxation and also some related issues. So these 4 pillars are cross-cutting issues which pertain to the economy, which pertain somewhat to the strategic domain also. workers started on this. All of us are looking into details. And this kind of a exhaustive engagement between US and India augurs well for the Indo-Pacific region. And therefore, I think talk about any one issue would probably bring the whole gamut of issues, the entire panoramic view that I have of it, or the IPEF has of it, to bring down to just one data. We'll have a lot to say, but you'll miss out on the larger canvas, which is now getting stretched out. So I think we are in for very good times, and this is only going to strengthen the global order, although the global order itself is something which we'll have to look at fresh, considering that multilateral institutions are today not really as strong, as nimble, as output-oriented as they were once upon a time. So these are changing times, and I would think this kind of a relationship with the United States for India and for the United States to have it with India are signs of positive development for those who look at, a better global order.